Yeah.
Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Got it.
Got it? Okay. So I'm sure you've been to this before, Tammy. This is kind of like our main landing page for bibliostat.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's Jenny. Jenny's with us.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
No
What
worries.
else, Tammy? Jenny, sorry. So this has a link to the login to the new version of Collect. We're using a new one this year. Blank copies of the survey, if you want to print them out or fill it in, there's a Word version you can download and fill in locally before you enter the data on bibliostat, or a PDF if you'd want to print it. We also have a copy of the survey with the changes highlighted here from year to year. The good news is that there were no changes this year compared to last year. The only change was that website visits is now a national question, and we were asking that question before, so it really didn't affect us much. A link to the instructions, if you want to look at these are also embedded in Collect. FAQs about the program. The good news is the new version of Collect now supports Chrome. The old version didn't support Chrome. So that's kind of a big thing with bibliostat that they've made that change. The federal element definitions, these are the federally required questions and how they define them. If you want to look at that, these definitions are also embedded in Collect as well. A survey guide for new directors. This is kind of like how to navigate, kind of like some of the things we're going to go over today, like how to navigate Collect, some things, tips, tricks. We just put this up not too long ago. There's a flow chart for how to count electronic things. This becomes an issue when you have a vendor other than Overdrive for audiobooks or ebooks or local databases. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where to count those. So we've got a flow chart here that tells you, leads you in the right direction. That can be helpful. We've also got the Overdrive circulation guide. If you're probably a member of Nebraska Overdrive, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So those numbers are going to be pre-filled on your survey. We pull those and pre-fill them for you, both for the holdings and the circulation. But if you'd want to run those reports and figure out where we got that data from, this is kind of a step-by-step guide that tells you where those numbers came from. There's also one if you have an Overdrive Advantage or an Advantage Plus account, kind of a guide to how to pull those numbers as well for this report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into your survey, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. I won't change any of the data. So I'm going to log in as the administrator here. And this is what I see when I log in. So this kind of gives you a little peek into what I look at. So these are the libraries that have submitted their surveys and the ones that are completed and locked.
Sam, is that the login that I get? Because I can see them.
I think that when you log in, you just see your system here.
Well, that's what I meant, but I at least see my system. That's really what I was thinking.
It would give you it would show you that, if they've opened the survey, like here's an example, like Brunswick Public Library hasn't even looked at their survey. They haven't opened it yet.
Okay.
Bancroft, for instance, opened it, 13th, what was that, yesterday?
Yeah.
They opened theirs yesterday. When they submit it, there'll be a little check mark here that says submitted.
Okay.
And then once I review them, I go in and I check this reviewed button here. And then everything's locked.
Okay.
And completed. So
okay. Well, that's good to know, because I'm going to be, like I said, I'm going to be out visiting libraries over the next 3 days, and so
yeah, sometimes that's helpful. Some people wait until they do everything locally and they enter it all at once. So
right.
Seeing a blank here is not something to be tremendously alarmed about.
Right.
Kind of depends on the library. So I'm going to log into yours here, and this is usually what you see here. We've got status. This usually comes into play at the end. This will show us if we've got any unanswered questions, edit checks, or an error here. And that error, I think, is probably a browser issue. It's something that we've had with collect come up. So if that happens, Jenny, let me know and I can report it to them.
Okay.
There's a print icon here that you can print. Usually when you've completed the survey, you can print it. You can also log back in and print your survey anytime after you submitted it.
Okay.
From the main screen here on the survey list. So you could print a prior year survey here. Any of these surveys you could print going back to 2001, which is probably when we started using collect. So let's go back here.
Okay. So I have a question on this first page already.
Sure.
So you're looking at it. I have been working on it, but I thought that I had changed our address because we've moved to a new facility. And I thought on my screen that I had changed it already. So I'm wondering why when you're looking at it on your screen there, it has our old address. Is it because I haven't submitted it yet?
No, it's because that field is locked and you can't change that. You would need me to change that if you've moved to another address.
Okay.
You probably entered it in your note field here.
I think so.
Maybe
Maybe that's where I typed it in, not in the box, but in the
Let's
note.
look at that. And the reason that these fields are grayed out and locked is because we had people changing like street to ST period. And when we submit our data to IMLS, stuff like that comes up on an edit check. And so it's easier for me to lock those fields. And then in an instance like you, where you've actually moved to a new library, we'll have to enter a note, but then I'll have to make that change here. So I don't know if you know here, this is the hide last year's answers, show last year's answers. I almost always turn the show last year's answers on.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, that's an important feature. And then over on the left-hand side, this is your navigation. This is broken down into sections here if you'd want to navigate to a certain part, either forward or back without, clicking next through the whole thing. So let's look at your street address here. You've entered a note here, it looks like, with your new street address. So me as the survey administrator, I can make that change for you. And we'll just do it here. And we're going to enter a note that says we've moved to a new address. Did you build a new library?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so we're going to say we built a new library and moved. And we're going to save that note because that'll trigger an edit check later on when we submit our data to IMLS. And then we'll enter this here. Do you have a PO box by chance?
No.
Okay, so we'll just leave that blank because this is if you'd have a PO box. So that's usually left blank. Sometimes it's pre-filled with your street address and I'm not sure why, but we'll just leave it blank. I think that'll be fine. So then down here, all of this should probably be pre-populated with maybe what you entered last year. Did your telephone number remain the same though?
Yes, it did.
Okay, we'll keep that the same. Population figures. I get some questions about population figures. We're required to use population figures that come from the State Data Center, which is UNO in Omaha. And they use the July 1 American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So that's where these numbers come from. Looks like yours are the same. Sometimes these differ if the legal service areas, like say you served a county population, this might be a larger number than your local population. But in your case, it looks like it's the same. So if you click on next, this should save the data that we've entered here. Some people are paranoid, like me, and hit save first sometimes before they hit next to make sure everything saves. I haven't had any reports of that in the new collect, but in the old collect, I had people report that they had clicked next and their data didn't get saved. I haven't had that report so far in the new version of collect. These fields in here in part 2 will be pre-filled your number of branch libraries, bookmobiles. Again, if you've added a branch or added a bookmobile, contact me and I can go in as the administrator and make that change. Looks like you've updated your new library year that was built in 2018. Probably answered these questions already as well. You're obviously not working on a project because you just built a new library. 2.10, these are all codes that are assigned by IMLS. These are all, again, locked. Your street address in here has changed. And the reason that we're seeing this twice is the first record that we were looking at was the administrative entity for the Schuyler Public Library. If you had a branch in a central library, you would see these fields, more than one of these 2.10 to 2.20 fields. So we see this in like urban areas where there's a lot of branches. They have the first entry for the administrative entity, and then this for each branch. So
Can I ask?
The main branch, and then other branches, bookmobiles, and things like that. Yes.
When you're putting in a note, I see that it has several tabs,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering why. Because I think, like previously for my changing the address, I think I put it under both federal and state on the tab there. So I didn't know which to put it with.
Sure. Okay, so let me back up a minute. You're right. When you open this note, you'll get federal, state, local, and previous year. So previous year is kind of helpful if you have the same issue come up, the same edit check. I always like to have people put it in the federal note because those are the things that IMLS is going to ask about. If you put it in the state note, they don't see that federal note. But in your survey, you notice how these questions here are in purple.
Mm-hmm.
Questions are in purple, and then there's some others like the fax number is not in purple. What that means is that these purple questions are federally required questions. So these are things that we have to ask, that every state has to ask, that are federally required. So if you have a purple question and you need to enter a note, always enter that in the federal question or in the federal note field.
Okay.
If you have one that's, say, black and you wanted to enter a note, you could enter that in the state field if you'd want to offer a further explanation. Okay. For local notes, we don't really see that a lot. What we see in the local notes are more for things that are maybe on your end. Like if there was a particular report that you ran to get the data, or a particular person that you contacted at the city clerk, for instance, you might put that information in there so that next year when you go to look at that data, if you didn't remember, you could look at that note and that would trigger your memory. Okay. That would be the reason to maybe enter a local note. But in this case, since we've entered a federal note, we can delete those state and local notes because we've already got one there under the federal note. And we'll delete it out of here too if it's there. And then we'll go over here and we'll have to make that address change here for your central library. So we'll do that. I can do that as the administrator. And that might trigger an edit check. I don't know. We'll wait until we get done. And if it does, we'll enter a note later. That'll give us some practice on that too. So a lot of this stuff doesn't change. Did your zip code change when you moved?
Nope.
Same, okay. Outlet type code, that's the CE, that's your central library. You have one central library. If this was a branch, you'd see a different code here. If it was a bookmobile, you'd see another code altogether. Your building square footage probably changed, so that might trigger an edit check as well. Like here, that might be locked. So we'll just enter 11,300. And I'm going to delete your note and see if that triggers an edit check. If it does, we can just enter a note saying we moved to a new building, and that'll take care of that. We just need something in the note field because IMLS will look at that. They compare the system. The bibliostat system uses the same edit checks that IMLS does. So it'll compare this year's data to your prior year. And if there's a large increase or decrease, large change or no change, a lot of the time that's what will trigger an edit check. So here you enter your hours open per year and your number of weeks. And I noticed that you have some notes here.
Yeah,
So
because
that explains your variance in the hours. And then also here, and that's fine, that's good. Again, these are codes that are signed by IMLS, geographic codes, FSCS definitions. We just leave those alone. And you notice here, this 2.31 also asks about hours. You think maybe, well, how is that different than what we entered up here? That's because for those libraries that have branches, they're going to enter the hours for each branch. And then down here, bibliostat will calculate the total. So in your case, you have one central library and you don't have any branches or bookmobile. So that number is going to be the same as what you entered here. But the reason that it appears twice on the survey is we may have libraries in the state that have a number of different branches, so that their public service hours per year that we report to the feds in 2.31 would be the sum of all their branches. That's why we see it twice. Okay, so let's move on to the finance part. I would say that most of the problems most of the questions that I get about edit checks about fiscal year are, I had one the other day where they entered a 31 and that triggered an edit check on the fiscal year. So yours looks good.
Oh, okay. I did.
2017 through 9/30/2018. You can look at last year. It's the same. It doesn't overlap, so that's good. Here, when we look at your reported revenue, that's a pretty large increase here. And it looks like you've entered a note. The new facility was built. Does that mean that the city increased your operating budget because you built a new facility, or is part of this money gone to the building of the facility? I guess that's the first question that I would have.
Well, let me grab my budget notebook, because basically that's how that's where I get my numbers. So
Sure.
Last year, or I guess the previous year, the 2000, the 200,000 year. Let me see.
You probably reported in capital revenue because it was a major one-time expense.
Yeah, because okay, let me see that number. Where is it? There we go. Okay, so my note for 3.3 was, it is the city's budget minus the county revenue. So we had, last year we had a tremendous budget because we were building a new facility, and we were also kind of planning what the expenses were going to be for the new facility and for the old facility. So that's why that number is so much bigger. But it looks like the capital outlay is much larger than the previous year's capital outlay.
Okay.
By like 250,000.
So let's look at your expenditures and see how those line up with this 490. There might be part of this that might be a capital revenue. I'm not sure. Let's look at the rest of your survey, and then we might have to come back to that.
Okay.
So here you've correctly reported. This is what I like to see as an NA here and a 0. Usually, if these are blank, I'll go ahead and do that. You've already done it. That's good.
Yeah.
You've received some money from Colfax County. No other local government revenue that you've received. This is your total. Bibliostat just calculates this total here. And this is what we report to the feds because that's in purple. You can see that's, quite a large change from last year. Library state aid, looks like yours didn't change. We pre-fill those numbers for you because we have them here. The grants, we used to try and pre-fill those, but it was really hard to determine whose fiscal year. I would have to go and look at each library's fiscal year and find out when the grant was actually paid. And so what we've determined is that the library is in a little bit better position to report that. If you need information to go back later, we do have a grants database on our website. You can go back and search prior year grants that are awarded or were awarded. And that's for youth grants, CE grants. Like if you had an internship grant, sometimes those are given out. I don't know if you received one of those in the past. It looks like maybe last year you probably got one here, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
For the $1,000, that's where you would report it here under the other revenue. I'm not sure why the internship grants, I think because they kind of have in the past came and went. That's probably why they don't have their own category, that they're lumped into the other section here. Federal government revenue, federal library improvement grants, those are, I think, always going to be zero from now, at least this year, because we haven't offered any LSTA subgrants. Unless you had a different library improvement grant, that's going to be really rare. That's a federal grant. Like an IMLS National Leadership Grant or a Sparks grant would go here, and I don't think any libraries have received those this year. If you had other federal source, that would go in here, like from another federal agency other than IMLS. Occasionally we see like USDA grants. I'm trying to think of some other federal agencies that would be reported here. It's really rare. It doesn't happen very often. Lender compensation, again, I'm looking at maybe trying to pre-fill these next year if we could. Those reports are online. It looks like you probably went and calculated that from the reports that are on the website, and yours were 202. One thing to keep in mind is that those lender compensation also apply to, I think there's a small amount if you have an Overdrive Advantage Plus account and you share those titles. I think there's lender comp that's paid for those too, and that would be on our website under the lender comp reports. Regional library system grants. This would be money if you receive from Three Rivers Library Systems. Sometimes these are in the form of reimbursements. Like say you attended a conference and Eric reimbursed you to attend or paid for your registration fee. Those would be reported here under 3.21.
Okay, I need to do that.
If you receive money, you would report that there, Jenny.
I did receive a Three Rivers grant to go to a workshop.
Okay, then yeah, you would report that under the 3.21 right here. For other revenue, you notice here how it says, are you familiar with the remove group and add group fields, Jenny? So you'll notice here where it says remove group or add group. What that means is you can, these are questions where you can click on that add group and add another one. Some libraries, like for this particular field, they like to itemize things. If they receive money, like say from donations, they would maybe put donations here in the amount. And then maybe they want to put photocopies here and itemize that amount. They have the ability to do that by clicking on the add group field. But it's perfectly okay on my end if you want to just combine those into one like you've done here. Local gifts and donations. If you had other ones, you could just list those here. Some libraries like to itemize them. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't make a difference one way or the other. And then the 3.24 just totals if you've entered more than one 3.23 up here in this add group field. 3.24 just totals the other revenue down here. And then 3.25 totals the other revenue and the operating revenue here, and that's what we report to the feds. So then the next section, you have your capital revenue. It looks like you did report the 258,628 for the building of your new library here. And last year it was only $3,000. There used to be edit checks assigned to these capital revenue fields that, you know, bibliostat and then IMLS would throw an edit check. Like in a situation like this, they would say, oh, you've received, you know, that's a large change from year to year. Well, that's kind of we got those removed because that's kind of the point of capital revenue and expenditures, because it's kind of a major one-time thing. So, you know, like next year, this likely will be a 0. You shouldn't get an edit check on any of these, where in the past, I think it did trigger an edit check. And the obvious explanation was, you know, our new library is completed. Here, do you charge a non-resident fee? It's a yes or no. You know, you've got that on there. That's a good description here. The other thing to keep in mind is if you want to copy and paste last year's answers, you can do a Control-C and a Control-V on stuff like this. Here you flagged a question.
That was just a note to myself to
Right.
look that up.
And that's what flagging a question does, is if you're doing the survey and you say, oh, hey, that reminds me, I want to flag this because I need to go and get that data. So when you go to submit your survey at the end, it'll say, hey, you got a flagged question. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a reminder to go ahead and, you know, it won't let you submit your survey until you've taken that flag off. And this is just a simple click and a no click to turn it on or turn it off. Any other questions about the revenue part?
I do have a question about the, I think it was state government capital revenue. I know that we got some sort of fund matching grant for the new library. I did not know about it until the city clerk gave me some documentation about it. Because I guess it was in the works and it was completed last year. So we got the final payment. Is that something that I would put under state government capital revenue 3.27?
Yeah, if it came from a state agency, you would put that under the 3.27.
Okay. The thing is, it was the second half of it, because I guess they did the first payment at the beginning of the construction project, and then once the construction project finished, they submitted the documentation and they said, yes, we'll give you the second half of it. I mean, because last year's answer was 0. Would the previous year's bibliostat show the initial
it might
payment?
we could go and look at that. Let me pull it up. So that would be 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up. We save a copy of your surveys locally as well, so I'm going to go over there so I don't have to get out of this over here and see if I can maybe check real quick.
Okay. And I'm sorry that I'm asking so many particular questions for
No, it's okay.
Because I know that they're recording this, but like Eric said, I have a one-on-one with Sam.
Yeah,
so
you're the only one that's here, so you can ask whatever you want. So it looks like 2 years ago, They only reported $47,450 in local government capital revenue. They reported zero for the state, so they probably didn't report it. So I wouldn't worry about the first half of it since that time period's already passed. But if you received money in the second half during this fiscal year, I would go ahead and report it under 3.27.
Okay, can I ask you a favor? Can you just click flag on that for me? Thank you.
And I would check with your city clerk or the administrator there and find out, find out the amount and the source. Because you'll need to enter, you might want to enter a note in the source field, but that's entirely up to you.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
So let's move on to expenditures. Here you've got salaries and wages, employee benefits, some common questions that come up. Sometimes I see libraries, yours look pretty good. Sometimes I see libraries that they enter the budgeted amount here instead of what was actually paid. And this number should not be a nice round number, and yours isn't. So that's, that's good. And then the other question that we get frequently is employee benefits. We have some library directors that contact their city clerk for this number, and the response is often, well, we don't pay any benefits. But for purposes of this survey, Social Security and FICA are considered an employee benefit. So almost entirely, unless you're paid as an independent contractor, there's going to be something that you would report in 3.37. We have, I think, a few that are paid as independent contractors, but that's really rare. Again, your numbers look good here. And then 3.38 is just the 3.38 is just the total of these two amounts here. And you'll notice that some of these calculations are grayed out. That's because you can't change it because it's a calculated field. And then here we want to know, these are just check marks of other benefits that are paid to the library director. And kind of the background, the reason that we ask these questions, we get a lot of requests for salary information. It's like one library wants to compare the director's salary to a neighboring community. Collecting data on what other benefits are paid is often helpful because the salary itself doesn't always tell the entire story. If, say, like in this case, you're also offered vacation, retirement, family leave, and all these other things. So that's one of the things that I think that collecting that data has been valuable for people that are doing salary comparisons. 3.50 is what you spent. Again, this is not necessarily what you budgeted for library materials in print format. This would include books, magazines, newspapers. Anything that's in print that your library receives, you report the expenditure here. Another thing to point out is that you see this little question mark here. And we had a problem in the last training. We clicked on this and you couldn't see it. I don't know if I can drag it over there. Can you see it?
Nope.
No, okay. We had a problem with it before, so I assume that we can have a problem with it again. But if you click on this little question mark, a little pop-up box will appear, and that'll provide you with a definition of what to count. So in this case, when I click on this, you can't see it, but it says report all operating expenditures for following print materials, and then it gives examples: books, serial back files, current serial subscription, government documents, and any other print acquisitions. So sometimes if you want to know how to count, what to count, or how to count it, you can click on this little question mark and it'll provide you with the data definition. Library materials in electronic format. This would be your Overdrive and any other database materials. So if you have any local databases, you would add that to that amount. For Nebraska Overdrive libraries, a lot of the time, this amount is always $500 if they don't spend anything on anything else. If it's exactly the same as the prior year, like for Overdrive, if it is $500 and that's what you reported last year and that's actually what you spent. That often triggers an edit check if it's exactly the same. And you can just enter in a situation like that, you can just enter a note in the note field that just says something like, this is our overdrive consortium fee and it hasn't changed from year to year.
Mhm.
You can enter that here or at the end if you got an edit check at the end.
Can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I learned that that Schuyler Library can purchase items specifically for the Schuyler Library on Overdrive. So I did purchase a few items for our Overdrive, and I added those into these totals because it's, I guess, well, no, wait, I shouldn't have done that because we had a credit with Overdrive. So I was just deducting from our credit on Overdrive. I wasn't actually spending money for that. Okay. I think I answered my own question.
Well, if you had items that you purchased for your local connection, like I think it's called Overdrive Advantage,
Uh-huh.
you would add that to what was spent here if you actually spent that.
Okay. Well, technically I didn't spend it because I had a credit with Overdrive Advantage. So I just used the credit to purchase 5 or 6 items.
In a situation like that, I wouldn't worry about reporting it
Okay.
if it was a credit. 3.52 is other materials, basically anything that doesn't fall into these two categories up here. Typically, this is CDs and DVDs. If you had video games, cake pans that circulated, you would lump that into this 3.52 for your expenditures. And then 3.53 just totals all these other things up here. So these 3 categories up here, this is your total. And in looking at, these are the things that I look at when I look at your survey. I look at, how this compared to last year. And if there was a large change from year to year. And in your case, you probably spent a little less on, might have been because you were moving to a new library, you just spent less on these materials this year. But your total collection expenditure is pretty close to what you had last year. So then this is a section that you probably haven't started yet because there's a lot of blanks here.
Yeah.
So for a facility, this would be like rent. Typically would be rent. Any other payments that you would make for the facility, utilities. And we were actually looking at this I'm not sure why. If you notice, these are all state questions here. And we were not really sure why we want to know what you spend on office supplies. I don't, or postage. I'm not sure that that's really important. So I think for next year, you might see some of this stuff consolidated. I don't think it's really important for us to know even what you spend on utilities. Definitely not important for us to know what you spend on telephone or postage. Computer hardware, I think we would want to know what you spend on computer hardware. So this may be a category that you would see separate. The difference here is if you look at 3.61 and 3.61 and 3.62, these kind of look similar. So the difference is that this is hardware, software, and accessories. This is electronic access. So typically if you have an OPAC, an online OPAC, I'm not sure what ILS you have. Like say you had Biblionics or Koha, Follett,
Cersei
Dynex, you would report that fee here.
Okay.
If it was an initial purchase of the software, you would report that in the 3.61. If it was an annual fee that you paid, you'd report that in the 3.62.
So, like for our cybersecurity, like our CyberSiv renewal and our Smart Shield renewal and our Malwarebytes renewal, would that be 361? Okay.
Yes, right here. You would report that under the 3.61. Continuing education, if you spend anything on continuing education, that would 3.63, and then everything else gets lumped under 3.64. So you might have things that just don't fit in these categories up here. You just report that in there. The other question that we get sometimes is for contracts for services. This would include, like, say things like you had an elevator contract, elevator maintenance contract, or a contract for lawn service, snow removal. You would
I have a contract cleaner.
contract cleaner.
Yeah. So her payment would go under that.
If it's are they paid as an employee? Or is it like okay, yeah, you would report that under here, like with the cleaning service.
Okay. But then the only other contract that I know is we have a photocopier, and they come in and they do that. And then, okay.
That would go under the 3.60, like a service contract for your photocopy machine or your computers.
And then for our IT, we have, I don't think it's a contract for services. I think it's a prepaid hours. Would that fall under contract for services?
Prepaid hours?
Yeah, because our internet, our phone and our internet go through either Eagle Communications or Eagle Technology, but we have a prepaid service agreement with Eagle Technologies to help us if we have any computer issues. So
you pay them a monthly fee to be available if something goes wrong. Yeah.
Well, it's not a monthly fee. It was like a lump sum.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would report that under the contracts for services.
Okay.
Sam, Eric here.
Yeah.
Donna, I don't know if you noticed, but Donna from Nebraska City's come online, and she's asking about pest control. Her question says, pest control, or are you only looking for professional services, IT, carpet cleaning for 360?
No, in that example, Donna, and hi Donna, by the way, and we're looking at Skylar's survey here because we just logged in. So we're looking at their survey here. But yeah, pest control, you would also report under contracts for services. You would lump that under here. And again, since these are state questions, these aren't super detrimental. The feds just want to know the total of the other. So, and like I said, we're looking at maybe consolidating some of this stuff next year. But in that example for pest control, yeah, you would put that under. Like if you paid a monthly or a yearly fee to have somebody come in and spray for bugs, that would be a contract for services. So then here we have our total operating expenditures. That would be the other operating expenditures plus everything else that we've covered before. That just totals everything up here. And I think that you'd want to look at your revenue and expenditures, because one of the things that I look at when I look at surveys is, if you remember, we had almost $500,000 that we reported in revenue, and here your expenditures are only $199,312, although you do have some fields to put in. So you kind of want to look at that, and I'm wondering if some of that amount that's in your revenue section might need to be moved to capital.
Okay.
So you'd want to take a look at that later on once you get these fields filled in. And then for your capital expenditures, you would put that under 3.67 here. There's just one total. We don't. We just want to know the total amount that you've spent. And sometimes I do look at capital revenue and expenditures and maybe ask questions. I've had a few libraries that reported, like capital expenditures but no revenue in the past. Sometimes it's carried over from the prior year, but I've had a couple libraries that reported the expenditures but no revenue. So kind of pay attention to that, I guess, when you enter it. They should be fairly close. But like in your case, if you receive the revenue and it was reported last year, it's not going to match, it's not going to be close to what it was because the revenue was reported in the prior year.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these amounts just are misreported. People don't understand, the major one-time expenditure. I usually tell people, that if you click on this little question mark, that kind of gives you some examples of what would qualify as a capital expenditure.
Okay.
But in your case, you built a new library, you're reporting the revenue, it's going to come close to what you've entered in expenditures. So here, let's go. If we don't have any more questions on finance, Donna, I don't know if you can unmute. If you have questions, maybe type them to Eric.
Yeah, she's typing them to me. She does not have a microphone.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to library collections. If you do have any questions about finance that come up later, let me know.
Looks like she's going to set up a new laptop and make that connection.
Okay.
So she's working on that.
So let's go into library collections. If you'll notice here, 4.1 through 4.4, we want to know about the books in your collection. If you'll notice here that this number is pre-filled, that's the number that you start with. That's this number down here that was the end of last year. We pre-fill it up here. So that's your starting number for this year is what you ended with last year. And then we want to know what you added to your collection during the fiscal year and what you withdrew to get the total down here. And this is important, particularly with the books withdrawn, because of your weeding rate on your accreditation application. I think there's a points if you meet that criteria. It's 3%, I believe. So that number feeds into your accreditation application for your weeding percentage. Electronic books, you notice this definition is kind of large.
Mm-hmm.
The thing to keep in mind is that if you're in Nebraska Overdrive, this is going to be pre-filled for you. It's basically a snapshot of at the end of the fiscal year the e-books that were available through the consortium. This number is pre-filled also, and I'm guessing that this is because I pre-filled it for you. Likely you are in the Central Nebraska Digital Co-op, is that correct?
That sounds familiar, yes.
Yep. So this 193 is the number that I received from Caitlin at Sump Memorial Library.
Mm-hmm.
She gave me this number, and this is the 193 is the RB Digital ebooks that were available to you. So that's where that number came from.
Okay. RB Digital. I'm taking notes on my paper copy of the bibliostat while we're going through this.
Sure. That's where that number came from. So that's pre-filled. Now, you said you had some locally purchased Overdrive Advantage titles. Those would go under this 4.7.
Okay.
If you purchased titles directly as an Overdrive Advantage or Overdrive Advantage Plus, you would put those under 4.7.
Loud.
Are you okay, Donna?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If you had another vendor besides Overdrive, you would add those here as well that weren't held as part of a consortium. That's really rare that happens. Most of the locally held ebooks are Overdrive Advantage. But if you did have another vendor, you would just add that to the number. Audio physical units, these are CDs. I don't think very many people have tapes these days, so I would say this is CDs and playaways. Again, this pre-fill is from the prior year here, up here. You add the number that you added during the fiscal year, the number that you've deleted. For audio downloadables, these are audio books available through Nebraska Overdrive. Again, this is pre-filled by us. This is likely pre-filled from your Central Digital Co-op number. I'm guessing that this is one-click digital. Again, that's the titles that were available at the end of the fiscal year. If you had local audiobooks, those would be entered in 4.15 here. And then 4.16 is just the total of the audio downloadables. So if you didn't have any, you would just enter a 0 there if you didn't have any local audiobooks.
Okay, so to go back, 3.51 was the cost of those additional overdrive purchases that I made on credit. I wouldn't need to do the dollar amount, but I would have to do the item count here.
Yeah, if say there were 5 that you bought with that credit, you would just put 5 here.
Okay.
Like 7. If they were ebooks. If they were, say you purchased 3 ebooks and 2 audiobooks, you would put a 3 here, and then a 2 under this audiobook part.
Okay, got it.
Okay, and then video physical units, these are DVDs. If anybody has VHS, those would get reported here as well. Again, this pre-fill is from your prior year up here. You enter the number that you added and enter the number that you've deleted. This also goes into your weeding percentage. If you notice those questions about ebooks and audiobooks, we don't ask about the number that were added or deleted. Those don't go into your weeding percentage. Part of the reason for that is that the lending model on Overdrive is so wonky. You know, you get 5 checkouts, 20 checkouts, you know, they're leased. We don't include that in your weeding percentage because it's just too hard to determine when they were added and when they were deleted. Video downloadables, for most people, this is going to be a 0. There are a few vendors. Hoopla, I think, would be one example of video downloadables. You would report those under here. It's really rare for most people. It's a 0. Print serials, this would be newspapers, magazines. Again, this pre-fills from your prior year. If you added 3 subscriptions during the year, you added 3 last year and deleted 6. You would enter the number that you added and the number that you removed. Again, this is subscriptions, not necessarily issues. It's one thing to keep in mind. Other materials, basically anything that doesn't fall into those categories. Like here you've had cake pans, I think that's probably the most common. Keep in mind these are things that need to circulate. They need to leave the library. So if you had something that was in-house circulation, sometimes those are video games that circulate in-house or headphones. You wouldn't list those here. This would only be things that leave the library. This gives us examples: framed art, sculpture, cake pans, patterns. We see some children's kits, puppets sometimes are a description of other materials that circulate. I would say cake pans probably the most common.
Hey, Sam.
Miscellaneous on here too, if you don't lump it all. Hi, Donna.
Thinking in the future, is the maker's space equipment going to be totally different for next? We get ours in October, so it's for next year's. But is the report going to take that into consideration later on?
Well, like for purposes of this thing, if you had, like, say you had a button maker that did circulate,
yes,
you would list that under here. You would
okay.
Cake pans, button maker, whatever.
So
if it was equipment that didn't leave the library, you wouldn't report it here.
okay. Thanks.
Okay. So again, you've added the number added during the year, number deleted during the year, and then these are all totals. Just totals your other materials, total of materials held. Again, this is what goes into your accreditation application for your reading percentage. I think there's some edit checks that maybe are put on these questions that look at your last year's answer. Like say you didn't add any materials, it's probably going to ask you why. It's going to come up with an edit check at the end and say, hey, you might want to check that data because you probably added something. So let's go into library services here. Number of registered borrowers. You can't see the definition, but one thing to keep in mind is that the definition says that you should purge your files every 3 years. So for your registered borrowers, that comes up sometimes because we have libraries that don't purge their files regularly. IMLS recommends that those files should be purged at least once every 3 years. I know that like my library every year here in Lincoln, when I go in, they check my my address once a year to make sure that I'm still at the same address. So they do it every year. IMLS wants you to do it every 3 years, or at least every 3 years. Annual library visits. This number can be kind of tricky. I would guess that both of your libraries probably have door counters. In smaller libraries, oftentimes this is an estimate based upon an average week, where they take maybe a representative sample and then multiply that by the number of weeks that they're open to get the visits number. And that's okay to take an average. You know, although with the door counters, that can be kind of difficult data, you know, if you have people walking in and out sometimes too. Reference transactions, this is something that, you know, if you click on the question mark here, you get this huge definition of what to count and what not to count as a reference transaction. Again, you can take representative samples, like during an average week. I usually tell people if you can take, you know, if you don't calculate your reference, I guess the first question is, do both of you count your reference transactions daily?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's just that I heard music playing earlier, and I think it has something to do with my iPad headphones, the little microphone button on the wire. Anyway, yeah, we try to keep track of that with basically just ticks at the circulation desk. It's by no means the most accurate, but it's what we're
Better than nothing.
It's what we're going with now.
Yeah, we do transactions and lookups and everything pretty much except for where the bathroom questions, directional, we don't count.
Right. And
but you said you can't pull up on the demo here. We can't pull up the definitions. Is that right?
Well, I can click on this little question mark, but you guys can't see it for some reason when I drag it over here.
No worries. I'll just look it up later on.
But you're absolutely right. You don't count those directional transactions. Where's the restroom? How late are you open? That type of thing. One thing to keep in mind is that, you know, an interaction with a patron might count as more than one reference transaction too.
Yeah.
If somebody comes in and they say, hey, I need help with, you know, this online form, and you go over and help them, and then they have another question that's not related to the topic of the first question, I would count that as 2 reference transactions.
Yeah.
Annual uses of public internet computers. I'm guessing that both your libraries probably have a system where your patrons reserve computers, so you probably have a way of calculating this. If you didn't, you could also take a representative sample of your public internet computers. I had a question. It's question that had never came up before. It might have been in the first training. I'm trying to remember, Eric, about a library that checked out tablet computers for in-house use.
Yeah, they had iPads or tablets that the question was is when they check out, is it an outside transaction or is it an inside? Oh, and they check them out for inside use only.
Yeah, it was in-house use of like a tablet computer, and you would the answer was yes, you would count that as a in this 5.4 as a use of public internet computer. So 5.5 is your circulation, and you know the tricky part here is what's an adult? What do you classify as adult? What do you classify as children's? That can be kind of tricky. I always tell people, you know, however it's cataloged in your ILS, however those, you know, how those reports come out, if it's an adult material or children's material, obviously sometimes there's going to be materials that have an overlap or that you know, might get lumped into adult but could go in either category. So I always tell people, you know, however those reports are ran, make that determination on your end to report as an adult or children's. For the electronic stuff, if it's overdrive, we pre-fill this for you. So like here, it looks like for Skylar's library, they had 1,466 overdrive, adult overdrive circulations, and that includes ebooks and audiobooks. You're going to want to add your Central Nebraska Digital Co-op stuff to this. So if you get those numbers from Caitlin or however you run those reports, you're going to want to add those because this doesn't include anything other than overdrive. So if you had one-click titles, you're going to want to add those to that 1466 number. And also add it to the children's number down here for your overdrive. So then down here we have some totals. This total is your children's materials. That's what the feds want to know. Donna, since you jumped in late, you notice here some of the questions are in purple. Those are the federally required questions. Yep. Okay. Again, these are totals, total physical items, total electronic materials, total circulation here.
Can you remind me if the edit questions come up as you're filling it out or only after you go to save the section?
After you go, they would come up at the end when you go to submit in the status button, like right up here in this button. You could always go up here. I always tell people kind of wait until you're done with the entire survey and then go into the status and look and see if you have any unanswered questions or edit checks. You can, if you know it's going to trigger an edit check, like if you had data that was way outside of what you entered last year, you can always enter a note here on the fly if you know that you're going to get an edit check. Sometimes you can wait until the end.
And all the dollar figures are actual expenditures, not budgeted amount?
Not for your expenditures, yes. That was one of the things that we talked about before you came on is, yes, like for your salaries and wages, it's what you actually spent, not necessarily what you were
budget.
budgeting.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be a nice round number. I had a survey I was looking at the other day, and their
Everything ended in zeros.
Salaries and wages were $20,000, and their benefits were $5,000, exactly $5,000. So they were entering the budgeted amount and not the actual expenditure. So in 5.14, this is where we would report local databases, and IMLS doesn't refer to these as databases. They call them electronic collections, which is, to me, confusing to a lot of people. So basically that chart, Donna, before you came on, we had on our bibliostat section of our website, there's a little flow chart. Let me pull it up real quick for you and just show you. There's this flow chart here for how to count electronic stuff. So like if you'd want to know, does it fall under a database or is it an ebook audiobook? There's this flow chart that kind of tells you
Okay.
which can be kind of confusing, but if you follow it here, it kind of tells you where to report things. Or if it's a known database, here it looks like Skylar had 6 last year that they entered. So right here in 5.14, if you still have 6 local databases that you subscribe to, like say it was Mango Languages, Chilton's, trying to think of some other local databases that you might subscribe to. Zinio would be an example. You would put the total number of databases here. Like if it didn't change, you would just enter a 6 here. And then you have to itemize them down here. So in 5.15, you would put the name of the database. So if you had Zinio, like we know that you have Zinio as a part of the Central Digital Co-op, you would put Zinio and then the number of Zinio uses. And then you would click on the add group and then itemize the next one. So say the next one was Mango Languages. You would put Mango Languages and then the number of uses of that. And then click on keep adding groups until you had 6 of them total.
If we use that, if we filled in one last year, the previous answers would appear there? Or they would appear in the same order that they were sent in last year?
They don't, because bibliostat has a problem with displaying data in repeating groups. And this is a group. So you would want to actually look at your physical copy that you saved or your electronic copy of your database for that, because that's one of the things that they were looking at that we would like to see in the future, that our states that have bibliostat have reported to them, is that it would be nice to know what you entered last year in this repeating group. And I think that's something that they would like to do as well, but the system just doesn't do it right now. So you would itemize those all into 5. And I think there's an edit check assigned if you tried to enter 7 5.15 5.16 fields, but you entered a 6 in 5.14, it would trigger an edit check. So you're going to want to make sure that those kind of match up. 5.17, successful retrieval of electronic information. This is just the sum of all those 5.16s that you entered. 5.18 is pre-filled. This is Nebraska Access. These are databases provided by us. And then 5.19 just totals your local ones and Nebraska Access here. And then electronic content use, this is another thing that they collect on the federal level. Basically what this is this is the number of uses of like your overdrive. So like ebooks and audiobooks, it sums that and your database use. And I'm not sure why that number is important, but that's a federal question. So bibliostat automatically does that calculation. And then 5.21 is total collection use here. Again, another calculation. Interlibrary loan. So this is the total number of materials you loaned to other libraries and then borrowed down here. And a few things to keep in mind. If you borrow book club kits from like us at the commission or the systems, you report those under interlibrary loan here. If you borrowed a book club kit that had 25 different books that were the same title, that counts as 25 interlibrary loans. So not the title, but the number of volumes you would count as an interlibrary loan. That's one of the things that I think people weren't counting before. They didn't consider that as an interlibrary loan.
So 22 and 23 are interlibrary loans, and that includes, you said, if we borrow book kits from systems or like cells, you said?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And if we borrow 25 books in the kit, it counts as 25, not 1.
Correct.
Actual number. Okay.
Yep. Actual number of volumes and not necessarily
Items.
the title.
Gotcha.
If it was the same title, yeah. Sometimes this will come up as an edit check. Probably not for you guys, but sometimes this number is a 0. And you have smaller libraries that don't borrow items, they can just enter a note. That might be more important for Eric if he's helping somebody with their survey and they have a 0 and they had a 0 last year. That'll come up as a federal edit check, and they just need to enter a note that says, you know, we didn't borrow any items on interlibrary loan. Nebraska card registrations, I think for most people this would be a 0 as well. Programs. So I wonder if that might be a good stopping point for us, and we could hit programs, because I think that's it's going to take some time. If we could hit the programs on Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good, Sam.
Sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
Sounds coming back Thursday.
Yes. Thank you.
Donna, for your information, I've recorded this session,
Oh, good.
and so the
first part.
Yeah, the first part of it should be there. Give me till tonight. I'm headed up to Yankton this afternoon, so it'll probably be tonight before I can get that dealt
Yeah,
with.
no worries. That's great. I didn't know whether it was going to show up on Encompass Live or not, but if you recorded it, that's great.
It'll show up on our Facebook page. I'll send you the link.
Okay. Great.
Thank you kindly,
Very helpful.
Sam.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And there, did you say there's any new questions?
I'm sorry?
Are there any new questions on this form this year?
The only new question this year is the number of website visits is now a federal question. And
Okay.
we've been asking that for the last 2 years.
Okay. There was one there, and I don't even remember what it was just a moment ago, and it was like, wow, did I answer that last year? It's all jogging the memory.
And like I was saying too, before we came on, I was talking to Eric, in doing some of these trainings, like we were looking at the, well, I'll show you real quick. We were looking at some of the expenditures. I think that was about the time you were logging in.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at maybe making some changes next year because.
Oh yeah, I got that part of it. You're consolidating some questions like utilities and office supplies and.
Yeah, and I think we can do that in the technology part too.
Okay.
Maybe.
Great.
Because everybody gets survey fatigue. And I think if we can lessen that, it would be good. And the other question that we have to ask ourselves is, why are we collecting this data? Is it useful? Is it accurate? I mean, those are questions that I think we can ask and say, well, if we're not using it, then why are we collecting it?
Right.
So.
Well, thank you.
Okay, we'll see you Thursday.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you very much,
y'all later.
Sam.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
And
Thanks for
Donna
your help.
will be on that same number.
Address.
Right.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.